Good evening, and thank you for joining tonight's virtual town hall hosted by the City and County of Denver and the Denver Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. My name is Riley Lemie, and I will be your moderator tonight as we provide an update on the Central Community Transportation Network process. Before we continue, a quick word from our interpreter.
Si le gustaría escuchar esta presentación en español, oprima las teclas *0, o sea, estrella 0. Si desea dejar una pregunta para los presentadores, oprima *3, o sea, estrella 3.
Great, thank you. We currently have about 87 participants that have joined us tonight to discuss a new approach to mobility planning in your neighborhood that is called the Community Transportation Network Program. Specifically, the focus of tonight's meeting will be to provide an update on 13 different bikeway projects that are being designed in the surrounding neighborhoods. Some of you may have already joined us for prior meetings, and for others, this may be your introduction to the process. You can view our previous meeting materials on the project website by accessing bit.ly/DenverMovesNetworks. Again, that is bit.ly/DenverMovesNetworks. We want this presentation to be interactive, so if you would like if you'd like to ask a question, you can type your question into the chat window if you're joining us online, or you can dial *3 to be able to ask a question. If you're viewing the presentation in full screen, you may want to minimize back to the normal view in order to access the chat box. We will be pausing at certain times tonight to be able to answer your questions. While we may not be able to get to everybody's questions, we will be posting a question and answer box to the project website based on what we received tonight. So next, I will walk you through what this meeting is all about and we plan to discuss. So first, we'll provide a background on the Community Transportation Network program and remind everybody where we're at in the process and what has been completed so far. We will then discuss how we have engaged the community about transportation in their neighborhood and summarize what we've heard so far. Our next part of the meeting will be to highlight the feedback that we've received on over 13 different bikeway projects that were first introduced to the community back in June, and we will discuss how we are incorporating your feedback into the next stages of the design. We will then wrap up by walking you through the timeline for the rest of the process and share with you how you can stay involved. So next, I'm going to demonstrate who is on the line tonight with us, and joining us is a number of different transportation experts that are working on this project together. You'll hear from them shortly. Again, my name is Riley with Denver's Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, but I'm also joined by Charlie Alexander and Nikki Silva, who are design consultants that are helping the city with this project. You'll be hearing from them as well. Nora Neurreiter will be moderating the question and answer sessions. And then finally, Eileen Yazzie, the Transportation Planning Manager at the city, is also joining us. Before we continue, I do want to thank everyone for supporting the City and County of Denver in our efforts to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 by participating in an open house that's in a virtual format. For the foreseeable future, all upcoming meetings that are related to the Community Transportation Network project will occur virtually through digital tools. So next, I will give you an overview of the project process. So between now and 2023, the City of Denver has funding to be able to implement 125 miles of bikeways from its bicycle master plan that was created in 2011. Building out bikeways is one of the strategies that the city is using to be able to provide our residents with more efficient travel options. The city is currently concentrating these investments into 3 different focus areas that are called community transportation networks in order to rapidly build out connected networks of streets that are suitable for biking. These focus areas are being called the Northwest, Central, and South Central areas. Tonight's focus is on the Central area. And while we are in the process of engaging the public and the community on the proposed bikeway designs for these areas, we've also been gathering feedback about how we can improve travel for all modes in each area, so that way we can find opportunities to prioritize additional transportation improvements. I also want to note that many of the bikeway projects that you'll be learning about tonight are also designed to benefit people walking and taking transit, and as well as improve safety, including for people that drive as well. So on the next slide, the map that's on the screen shows you the focus area, which again includes the neighborhoods of downtown, 5 Points, City Park, West City Park, Cole, Clayton, Skyland, and Whittier. So the highlighted sections of the map show corridors where we currently have funding for design and construction of some type of bikeway improvement. The projects that came forward that you see that are funded originally came from something that's called the Denver Moves Bicycles Plan that was developed in 2011 through community input and then updated again in 2015. The city has slowly been building out the projects from this plan as funding has become available. Funding has been dedicated from the last few budget cycles to help us continue to speed up the implementation of this plan. And this again is designed to help us to be able to rapidly build out the planned bicycle infrastructure that was identified for this area. In our most recent series of community engagement, we asked for input on 13 different we asked for input on bikeway designs for 13 different corridors. In just a little bit, we'll be summarizing what we heard so far and how we're addressing that input. But first, just a quick reminder of the overall goals of this program. And again, this just speaks to why are we, not only why are we doing this program, but why are we building bikeways? And that's for 5 reasons. One, and most importantly, is to improve safety. And that's part of our Vision Zero program, where we are committed as a city to eliminating traffic deaths. And then 2, to be able to encourage mode shift and help people to be able to choose different methods of transportation. Our third goal is to, again, to be able to deliver low-stress bikeways and to meet Denver's goal of delivering 125 miles of new bikeways by 2023. Our fourth one, again, is to provide more travel options that help with traffic congestion. And then 5 is to be able to prioritize multimodal projects that can be integrated into existing programs where feasible. So that's to be able to help to address the needs of other travel modes when possible. As I mentioned, this process is going on a pretty rapid timeline, so we're trying to deliver all of these bicycle projects by 2023. And you'll hear me talk a lot about bikes tonight because the program is initially focused on implementing these bikeways because that's what we currently have funding for, and that's the current focus of the process. However, later this fall, we will be hosting additional public town halls to address some of the other concerns that we've already heard about from the neighborhood regarding the other travel modes. So that'll happen a little bit later this fall. And then in terms of the bikeway projects, there will be more. Those are slated to be constructed, some of them in 2021 and some of them in 2022. So next, I'm going to hand it off to Charlie, who's going to talk to you about some of the feedback that we did hear when we've had past community meetings. So Charlie, I'll hand it to you. Charlie, it looks like we're not able to hear you. Well, it looks like we're having some trouble getting Charlie to hear, so I'm just gonna go with this part instead. So you have to listen to me for a little bit longer. But again, we had when we first launched the Central Community Transportation Network planning process back in March, we asked the community to tell us how we can improve traveling in individuals' neighborhoods and what opportunities you see to improve your experience. This was first done with an in-person public meeting that was held on March 10th. That was at Manual High School. So that was one of the last public meetings that we had before we had to switch to a virtual format. At the March 10th meeting, we asked people to place dots on the areas where they would like us to improve access to transit, prioritize sidewalk gaps, where there is concerns with speeding or visibility, where street crossings could be improved, and where streets could be improved for people riding a bike. All in all, we received 802 comments for the Central Denver neighborhoods that I mentioned earlier. And so great, got a lot of great feedback from the community about where they'd like to see transportation improvements. We also asked the same questions in an online virtual tool. And again, like I said, we received over 102 comments in combination. So just real quickly in the next slide, I know this slide is really hard to see, but just showing that We did see a lot of comments, both not only in the downtown area, but also in the eastern Denver neighborhoods as well. So a lot of comments were related to slowing down speeds on 29th Street, on 26th. We also heard a lot about comments focused on that York is difficult to that York is difficult to cross and that Downing is difficult to cross. Altogether, we received a lot of comments, especially on some of those arterials that are more difficult to cross, not just about speeds, but also about helping to be able to cross on a bicycle as well as on foot. So those are comments that we are taking a look at. And if you can go to the next slide, please. And next slide, please. Like I said, we got over 800 comments. And so what the next step on those is to be able to sort all of those different comments into an individual category or program. We will be coming back to you in the fall and asking you to prioritize locations where we can make improvements. And then what we will look to do is to sort those ideas into different programs that the city has for making improvements, whether that be we have a program that is dedicated for improving the street for transit. We have a program that is dedicated to traffic calming. So trying to sort all of those different individual concerns into the appropriate buckets. So we're going to pause now, and I'm going to hand it off to Nora, who's going to take this time to ask us some questions that have been coming in. So I will switch it to you, Nora.
Thank you, Riley. A couple of housekeeping items. If you're on the phone and you need to ask a question, please dial *3. For those of you online, if you have a question, and you can type it into the question box beneath the streaming video, and we can read it on air. We do have a question from JP, who asks, did we move back towards creating bikeways and paths on Franklin Street? Franklin is the best connection north-south, which reaches all the way from 39th Avenue Greenway to Cheeseman Park, avoids having to go around the hospital. And I don't know, Riley or Nikki, this might be a question for you.
Yeah, so thanks, Nora. I'll start with that question, and then maybe Nikki can give some more detail. And we actually are going to talk about this a little bit later in the presentation. We are looking at changing the alignment of the Franklin or of the neighborhood bikeway because of the overwhelming number of public comments that we received to switch that alignment. So we'll be getting to that a little bit later on in the presentation, so stay tuned.
Thanks, Riley. We do have another housekeeping question from Kathleen. How do I log in? The answer to that is to go to bit.ly, Denver Moves Networks, and you can click on the ctnvirtualopenhouse.com link that will get you to the streaming slides. Our next question is, neighborhood bikeways put cyclists and drivers in the same space. How do neighborhood bikeways encourage drivers to reduce their speeds and keep cyclists safe?
Great question. So neighborhood bikeways are designed both to do two things. One thing is to slow down speeds. So to help to slow down vehicle speeds, there's a number of different treatments that we'll use to help encourage slower speeds and make it so that it's an environment that feels more comfortable between both people riding a bike and driving. We also do things on neighborhood bikeways to discourage traffic volumes. So and we'll talk a little bit about that later tonight, but there's intersection treatments that we will use to discourage cut-through traffic or encourage kind of non-local traffic on those streets. And in combination of those two things helps to make the street a better shared environment. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. And you'll be able to see some of the treatments that we're using to be able to encourage that.
Related to that question, Vision Zero is an overarching goal of the city. How does it relate to bike planning and and network planning in particular?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so ultimately that is one of the main reasons why we're doing all of these projects is for safety. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Vision Zero is our part of our plan at the city to be able to reduce traffic-related deaths, because zero is the only acceptable number of traffic-related deaths on getting from point A to point B on Denver streets. The reason why we're doing more bikeway projects is exactly to get to that goal. It's important for us to be able to protect our most vulnerable users, and that's what these bikeway projects do, is they provide space for them to be able to ride safely, or intersection treatments that help to be able to reduce conflicts between people driving as well as people on bikes. A lot of these improvements are also dedicated to helping not only people on bikes, but also people walking and crossing intersections as well. For example, a lot of the neighborhood bikeways, there are things that we'll do to increase visibility at the intersections so that it's safer for people to cross. So just to name a few.
One last question is development and new construction being taken into consideration in the planning of safe bikeways in central Denver?
It is. So one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to look at what the long-term network should be. Right now, we're very focused on 13 projects that came from the 2011 Denver Moves Bicycles plan. But as you know, a lot has changed since then. So we are looking at how can we build bikeways that not only more bikeways in the future on streets where they're necessary, but how can we further make sure that our bikeways are compatible with the type of development that we're seeing and still safe at the same time.
Thanks, Riley. We do have one more question before we go back to our presentation from Kathy. In densely populated areas where street parking is at a premium, how will both be accommodated?
Mm-hmm.
Street parking and cycling.
Yeah, thank you for that. So that's a great question. The good news is that the majority of the projects that we're talking about tonight, at least in the central area, don't require us to remove parking, and that's because they're neighborhood bikeways. These are shared streets that, again, they're shared between people driving as well as people riding a bike, so the majority of them do not. In certain cases, though, there are a few examples of streets where there is a trade-off between that. One of the things that we do at the city, before we make a recommendation to make that type of change, is that we will study the street to understand how the street is being utilized. So how many people are parking there per day? What's the impact going to be if we are removing the parking? What other kinds of designs can we do before we make that switch? So in some cases, it's a last resort type of thing. In other cases, it has to be done only if that's what's needed in order to provide a safe facility. But we do try to balance that out as best as we can.
Thanks, Riley.
All right, well, with that, I'm going to hand it off to Nikki, who is going to walk you through what we heard about the bikeway concepts that we currently had planned. So I will switch it back to Nikki.
Awesome, thanks, Riley, appreciate it. So yeah, as Riley mentioned, I'm going to jump into the community feedback that we heard on the bikeway corridors and kind of just summarize that for all of you guys. So some of you may remember, back in June, we hosted a virtual open house where we introduced a web map tool that allowed the community to provide public input on the proposed designs from the bikeway project corridors in the central area. And we had that survey open from June 25th to July 31st and received a total number of 274 comments. So if you're joining us for the first time tonight, the corridors shown on this screen are the ones that we asked for feedback on for the designs. And this graphic just breaks down the number of comments that we received per each corridor. And we also heard a great amount of community feedback at the first open house. We've reviewed data such as 3-on-1 requests, and with all the public input that we've kind of heard over this year, I'll kind of jump into a bit more detail network-wide, the key themes that we've heard here and kind of how we're addressing them in our designs. So to kind of go through this, the first thing that we heard was that ped and bike visibility at intersections is a concern. So what we're going to do here to address that is something called daylighting intersections. And if you're not familiar with that, this top right picture is a really great example. So that picture on the left shows, vehicles approaching an intersection, they're having trouble seeing pedestrians or bicyclists crossing at the crosswalk because parked cars are in the way. And then the picture on the right really shows when you restrict parking close to the intersection, that sight line for the driver just opens up. So we'll be taking a look at, parking potentially too close to the intersection, or if there's any fixed objects that might be restricting the sight line of the vehicles to pedestrian and bicyclists. As far as driving speed, that's another concern that we heard. One thing that we're evaluating currently is potentially using speed lumps. So kind of more on that as we're evaluating that process. Another concern that we heard, so our bike lane corridors were buffered bike lanes for the most part, the majority of them. And with that, the buffered bike lane, or the bike lane was adjacent to the parking lane in these. And we heard a lot of comments of just the concerns of having a bike lane directly, adjacent to a parking lane and a passenger or a driver opening their door directly into the bike lane and that conflict there. So on several of our corridors that were proposed to be buffered bike lanes, we're actually upgrading them to protected bike lanes. So kind of, you can see on this picture on the right here, that basically means there's a buffer between the parking lane and the bike lane, as well as vertical separation using bollards. The next thing that we heard is, why are the routes not straight? There was a few corridors where you continue north and then you have to jet over a block to the east and connect that way. So we're evaluating to realign corridors, and I'll kind of discuss that. I know that's building off the question of Franklin Street, so I'll discuss that here in more detail in a few minutes. And then also just the desire to expand north-south connections. So a few of our north-south connections only go from 21st to 28th. And we heard a lot of comments about the concern of crossing 29th and, why does this not connect all the way up to Bruce Randolph or Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard? So that's another thing that we're evaluating, route extensions for some of the routes. I'll explain that here in a few more minutes in more detail as well. And then lastly, just a need to connect bikeways and bike routes through wayfinding, and that's kind of lacking. That was lacking in our designs that we proposed. So kind of with that, Denver just came out with a new wayfinding signage, so we'll be implementing that into all of our bikeway designs. And that just shows a little graphic of the sneak peek of what that's going to look like. So now that I just went through kind of high-level themes of what we heard on the corridors, I'm going to take a deeper dive into 3 corridors and just provide some updates on those. So kind of to dive into Bruce Randolph first. So this corridor was proposed to be a buffered bike lane. It was going to go from Downing to Colorado. And it's a corridor that connects many shops and restaurants, religious institutions, just a highly commercial area, especially on the west end, and then more towards Colorado Boulevard. So kind of with that, it connects the Northeast Park Hill neighborhood to the Clayton and Cole neighborhood, so quality connection there. The Marion Street neighborhood bikeway is the proposed one, is going to be connecting all the way up to Bruce Randolph. And there are several lower stress crossings throughout the corridor sprinkled through there that are signals or always stops throughout the corridor. And with that, so what we've heard on Bruce Randolph Avenue, we have heard from our designs, our buffer bike lane designs, we're removing parking on the north side of the road, and with that, we have heard a strong support for removing the parking lane and the center turn lane to improve safety for the bike lane along the corridor. We've also heard a lot about the desire to reduce speeds on this corridor. And then just the concern that there's a lot of short-term parking in front of the businesses, and kind of with that, the high turnover parking, people getting in and out of their cars, and with that being adjacent to the bike lane, that was a concern. So kind of with that, we heard an overwhelming support to upgrade to a protected bike lane. So I'm going to kind of dive into more of the details of what this protected bike lane would look like on Bruce Randolph Avenue. So that upper right, the cross section in the upper right hand corner is the existing cross section, and basically how Bruce Randolph is right now is there's a parking lane on the north and south side of the street. There's travel lanes and a center turn lane. And kind of with that, we have room to be able to install a bike lane on both the north and south sides of the street with a protected buffer. And then we'd need to remove parking on the north side of the street to be able to fit that, and parking would remain on the south side. And that's kind of a conversation we had through the design process of, what side of the street do we keep parking on? But we felt that there was a lot of commercial activity on the south side of the street more so that's why we had parking remain on the south side rather than the north. So kind of with that trade-offs and benefits there, the trade-off is removing parking on the north side of Bruce Randolph, but as a benefit, it provides a high-quality connection east-west that was currently lacking in this area. And then just to kind of get even a little deeper into the details here, so Bruce Randolph Downing to Steele is 48 feet wide, and then east of Steele it's 44 feet wide, so 4 feet narrower. So basically west of Steele we're proposing a cross section with 6-foot bike lanes and a 3-foot buffer and 11-foot travel lanes. And then in order to be able to fit the protected bike lanes on both sides of the street with a narrower cross section east of Steele, we'll be reducing the bike lanes down to 5 feet and the travel lanes down to 10 to accommodate that. And then to highlight some pieces of our design, so as I said, we're proposing it to be a protected bike lane using paint and bollards. That buffer area will provide an area between the parking lane and the bike lane so that the dooring concern won't be an issue. And with that, adding green conflict striping at all the intersections and driveways just to have some extra awareness from drivers that a cyclist would be crossing here. And then also adding protection at the intersection crossings. So you can kind of see that at the intersection shown here. So not only does this allow cyclists to cross the intersection more safely, but also it reduces vehicle speeds turning on and off of Bruce Randolph because of the tighter turning radius. And then last piece, just to highlight from the Bruce Randolph Avenue corridor design, was there's a bus route on Bruce Randolph Avenue, so we'll have to accommodate those bus stops, and kind of this graphic's just showing a mid-block bus stop and kind of what that looks like, as well as a bus stop at the intersection. So what we would do is kind of those areas where there is a bus stop, making it a shared bus and bike area that allows buses to pull over to the curb and unload and load at the curb. So the next corridor I want to discuss with you guys is the Gaylord Street Neighborhood Bikeway corridor. So this is a proposed neighborhood bikeway from 21st Avenue to 28th Avenue next to the park, or the proposed bike lane on 26th Avenue, Medical Center, several places of worship. There's several existing and proposed bikeways that it intersects with. And there's signals, there's a signal at 26th and North that'll kind of help guide cyclists off Gaylord and on 26th and across York to City Park. And then just a quality north-south connection that is parallel to York, but isn't York Street, much less traffic than York Street. And I know Riley started to get into this, but just to kind of recap, for those of you that don't know what a neighborhood bikeway is, it's a little bit of a newer concept. So basically, a neighborhood bikeway is placed on streets where there's low volume and low speed, and it prioritizes people walking. And it increases visibility at the intersection so that pedestrians and bicyclists are visible at the intersections, kind of measures how I mentioned before of parking within close proximity to the intersection or making sure there isn't any site obstructions or anything like that. And then there's treatments that are installed that not only discourage speed but also sometimes restrict traffic volume as well, so that low volumes remain on the street. And just to go over a few of them that we're looking at, bulb outs is one thing. So a good example of that is the picture on the left and the picture on the right, and it's done with concrete, curb, and gutter, kind of similar to the picture on the left, where you're actually pushing out kind of that whole sidewalk area at the intersection. So pedestrians are more visible to vehicles, the crossing distance is shorter for vehicles. And then similarly, you can do that with paint and bollards, as shown in the right-hand picture. So again, similar shape, it shortens the pedestrian crossing distance. It also slows turning vehicles down just because it's a tighter turn for them to make. So it not only helps with ped and bike visibility and crossing, but vehicle turning speeds as well. And then another thing that we're looking at is pedestrian refuge islands. So here, that's the picture in the middle, and this allows the pedestrian to cross part of the roadway and have a landing place before they cross the second half of the roadway, so that they only have to judge one direction of traffic at a time. So kind of to jump back into Gaylord Street, now that we have a better understanding on a neighborhood bikeway and exactly what that entails, some of the comments that we heard on Gaylord Street was really positive comments that it was a bike route parallel to York Street, but not York Street because York Street is busy. And then also that there was a lot of crossing issues at 29th Avenue and Gaylord Street, and that this corridor should extend all the way up to Bruce Randolph, just so that it can have that connection further north and then also help with the crossing at 29th. And kind of with that, this is one of the corridors that we're currently evaluating for potentially extending it further north up to Bruce Randolph. So this would connect it into the Whittier neighborhood and also help pedestrians and cyclists cross 29th Avenue, which we know is a concern. Again, this is up for evaluation. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard and 31st Avenue are both pretty busy roads, and they're currently not signalized. So we just need to strategically think about, like, can we cross those intersections or vehicle-wise, and then also kind of looking at, costs of implementing a signal and things like that are kind of what we're evaluating, and just seeing if we were to extend it north, how far north it could go.
Hey, Nikki, this is Charlie. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, we're hearing from Mate, our interpreter, that your audio is a little choppy, so it might be best if my audio is clear for me to take over from here, if that's okay.
Yep, go for it.
Okay. Can someone else just give me a sound check that my audio is clear?
I
Okay.
think it sounds good.
Sounds like it sounds good. Okay. So I'll take over here on the High and William Street Neighborhood Bikeway project. So some of the benefits of this project and purpose behind it are that it connects some key destinations such as the Uptown Medical Center with different schools and local parks. It also links to different existing and proposed bikeways, including those on 22nd and 23rd Avenue. Those are existing, as well as proposed bikeways on 21st, 25th, and 28th. It's going to help address different crossings of some of the east-west busier streets. We've heard a lot of feedback from the community that some of those different east-west streets are pretty busy. So this project will help address crossings, at least along this corridor, and really aiming to provide a high-quality connection through the neighborhoods of City Park West and Whittier, between Downing Street and York Street without traveling on either of those two busy streets. As was indicated on in some of the Q&A earlier, some of the comments that we got about the High and William Street corridor related to the directness of the route as a neighborhood bikeway. So some of the challenges to making a direct route in this area include blocks that don't continue all the way through the various neighborhoods. So in working with the community feedback and working with the feedback we've gotten from our stakeholder working group, we've aimed to revise this route to make it more direct. So specifically, the way that this route will work is that it will use Franklin Street between 13th Avenue and 21st Avenue. It will connect via 21st Avenue to William Street, and then it will continue north from there. So basically, Franklin Street gets through from Cheesman Park to the Uptown Medical Center, and then William Street gets further north past the Manual High School campus, where it does not go through. Okay. Next slide. So some other feedback that we've heard related to connectivity of the proposed bikeways on Lawrence Street in 5 Points and Rhino, as well as the proposed Bruce Randolph Avenue protected bike lanes. The comment specifically that we heard here was that the Bruce Randolph Avenue project should extend further west to Downing, and then we should use 34th Street to connect the bikeway from Downing to Lawrence Street. So the design team is developing concepts for exactly this idea so that users will be able to connect from Bruce Randolph Avenue across Downing Street to Lawrence Street. In a different area of the network, at the 20th Avenue and Tremont Street intersection, we heard feedback related to safety of people crossing the street, where there's currently a relatively high-speed right turn lane where Tremont connects into 20th Avenue, and that is something that we are proposing to remove as a part of a future project. I'll mention here a handful of projects that are already advancing to the design phase. So everything we've talked about thus far are projects where we're doing the planning and conceptual design, but there's a handful of projects, particularly in the downtown area, where those projects are advancing straight to design. The real reason that they're moving straight to design is because there's already been a fair amount of feedback we've heard through the community through different previous planning processes. Those were Denver Moves Downtown, as well as the 5 Points Neighborhood Traffic Management Program. So those bikeways are listed here. I'll go through them quickly. 7th Avenue through the Auraria campus, roughly from Auraria Parkway down to Colfax Avenue. That will be a protected bike lane. Those in downtown include an extension of the 16th Street Mall between WYNKOOP Street and Chestnut Street. I'll actually show a concept of what that looks like here in a minute. Extending or adding bike lanes along the entire length of 17th Street from WYNKOOP Street to Broadway. Filling in the missing connection on 15th Street, or at least extending the bike lane that exists on 15th Street currently from Larimer to WYNKOOP. Bike lanes, or I'm sorry, a neighborhood bikeway and Healthy Street is an outcome of the 5 Points Neighborhood Traffic Management Program on 26th Street. and let's see, extensions of the protected bike lanes on 18th and 19th Streets. Those are also associated with improvements to the free metro ride on those corridors. And then a protected bike lane on Larimer Street from 19th Street to 20th Street. So I mentioned the 16th Street project that will add some enhanced bikeways and improve the experience for the free metro ride on 16th Street. Just go through some of the details of that project now. So as I mentioned, that'll include a shared bike and bus lane in each direction. The buses will stay curbside and the bikes will stay towards the left side of that lane. That will have vertical separation between the adjacent travel lanes and the shared bus bike lane. It will also have bike signals at key intersections between WYNKOOP and CHESTNUT, so that people biking have a clear indication when they can cross the side streets. So I think we've now made it to our second Q&A opportunity, and I will hand it back to Nora to moderate the Q&A for this period.
Thanks, Charlie. We have a lot of good questions queued up here. And just as a reminder, *3 if you're on the phone to ask us a question, or fill out the question box under the streaming video if you are following us online. I'm going to start with a question from Nicole, after which I'll go to the phone to have Ben repeat his question for us. But the question from Nicole is, what about raised crosswalks? They slow driver speeds and they increase safety for pedestrians. That might be a question for Charlie.
Sure. So one of the, Nikki included the photo earlier of speed humps that the city is piloting through this. So that's a vertical device to slow down people driving on local streets. One of the key design features of those, if you noticed in the photo, is they actually have kind of cutouts that would align with the wheel paths of emergency vehicles. And the purpose for those devices is to allow emergency vehicles to pass through at a relatively higher rate of speed. But those kind of cutouts are too wide for passenger vehicles. So people driving in a normal passenger vehicle will still go over the vertical part of those devices. So generally speaking, a challenge in any vertical device, whether it's a speed hump or a raised crosswalk, is the trade-off between slowing down normal passenger vehicle traffic while allowing for acceptable response times for emergency vehicles. So the aim with the piloting of those speed humps is to understand, how they work for all users, including emergency responders, before we start to kind of open the toolbox even broader to think about additional treatments like raised crosswalks.
Thanks, Charlie. I'm now going to take Ben live. Ben had a question about 25th Avenue and parking. Ben, are you still with us?
I am still here. Can you hear me?
Yep. If you could restate your question, please.
Sure. So I was looking at the design specific to 25th Street, since it's near and dear to my heart. And I noticed that there is an increase to the setback for parking with the stop signs. On my particular block, we have 13 residences and no off-street parking access. So the increase to the setback for the stop signs would reduce available parking by approximately 20%. So I'm just wondering if that can be taken into consideration for areas like mine where there is not available off-street parking, and where the setback would cause significant challenges if that can be taken into consideration and the setback left where it is for the existing stop sign setback.
So Nora, I can take that question, or I can start to take that question. So that is something that we we'll be evaluating. One of the reasons for the pulling the setback is really for safety. So on some of these streets where we notice that there's significant challenges with getting across the street, it really comes down to a safety issue. And this is something that's called daylighting. And what that means is that at certain stop signs, you'll pull back the parking limits so that it's easier for both vehicles as well as people walking and people riding bikes to be able to see to get across the street. And so by pulling back that setback, it allows a greater sight line for people to see getting across the street. So it's definitely something that we can evaluate and consider. But what it really comes down to, again, is just a safety feature. So if it is something that we kind of determine is important for the safety of being able to get across the street, it is something that we kind of favor. And this is something that we do all over, not just on any bikeway project, but it happens a lot, especially in Capitol Hill neighborhood, in some of our more densely populated neighborhoods. This is something that we had to do before, but it's certainly something that we will consider.
Thanks. We do have another great question here, and this may be a question for Eileen. It's from Alan. How will the bikeways help with state greenhouse gas reduction, the state greenhouse gas reduction roadmap?
Sure. I'm Eileen Yazzie. I'm part of Denver Department of Transportation, and I just pulled up. So I'll be clear. I'm not 100% familiar with the state's greenhouse gas emission goals. That said, Denver also has its own climate goals. And one of the things that we recognize is transportation is one of the largest, it's the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. And so we definitely recognize that. As related, the mayor came out with his mobility action plan that relates in addressing how can transportation start reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. And that's when he committed to, his goal is that we have a shift in how many people are driving by themselves in their own vehicles. And on that, what we're doing, one, we're implementing transit strategies, we're implementing new sidewalks, cleaning up our sidewalks, having a better connected pedestrian network. And really related to this call is we're committed to building out 125 miles of bikeways in 5 years. And what we've learned in the research throughout the country and throughout the world, if we start providing better and safe bike facilities and sustainable transportation facilities, rather than just getting in your car, people will start to use them. So that's the connection, is we're building these bike lanes to start moving people to alternative sustainable transportation modes to help reduce our greenhouse gas emissions.
Thanks, Eileen. Oh, I think I'm going to go ahead and ask this next question, which is that a lot of current and proposed bike routes start and stop after a relatively short distance. How can we get longer, continuous routes built?
So I can go ahead and take that question, Nora. So a lot of the current routes that are proposed and are currently funded came from the Denver Moves 2011 bicycles plan. And we certainly realize that there's gaps in that plan from what was funded, because not only has the city changed, but how we design bikeways has changed a lot over the past 10 years. It's been almost 10 years since that plan was initially released. And so that's why we feel like it's time to update that. And you'll actually see that in my next slide. One of the things that we're looking at is, while we have the 13 projects that are funded that we asked for community input in this go around, where else should we be extending bikeways out in the future in this neighborhood, and how can we better connect those other areas in the city? And so I'll be speaking to that in another slide, but there will be a survey that will be going out where we'll be asking the community to provide feedback on where there is desire to get those expanded bike lanes.
Thanks, Riley. Our next question actually comes from Melanie, and her question is, can Denver enforce existing restrictions for plantings in the right-of-way to help aid sight and distances and improve safety?
So that question I might hand to Eileen as well.
Can you repeat the question one more time? I thought it was a bit engineering, not to say that I couldn't get a go at it, but it sounded a bit more engineering about sight distance. Charlie, is that more your area?
I can answer that one, Eileen.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so the question relates to restrictions for plantings in the right-of-way to maintain visibility and improve safety. Oftentimes this has a matter on clear walkways as well. So that is a matter for Denver code enforcement. So issues related to plantings in the right-of-way can be reported via 311, and those are followed up on. And if it's a matter of code enforcement, then code enforcement can be sent based on those. So I would encourage that any concerns about that be reported via 311, which can be done online as well as on your mobile device.
This is probably our last question for the evening. Thank you, Charlie, so that we can make sure to wrap up the end of the presentation. And it comes from James, who asks, we're building new corner pedestrian ramps throughout the city. Many incorporate turning radii, which are not pedestrian and bike friendly. Can we use this major public investment to create corner bump outs instead of faster turns for cars or removing a parking space? That might be a question for Charlie.
Nora, I can actually take that question. So a lot of the neighborhood bikeways that are proposed through that you'll see that are funded are actually going to do just that. So on a lot of those streets, what is being recommended and proposed as a way to slow down vehicle speeds and as well as to shorten crossing distance is a number of bulb outs. And so you'll see those that are in our designs right now where those are being recommended. And with that, we only have a couple more minutes left, and I want to make sure everybody gets out on time. And so I'm going to wrap up the presentation. I realize that we probably didn't get to a lot of your questions, and I saw a lot of great questions in the Q box. And so we will be providing a Q&A we will be providing a Q&A sheet posted to our website shortly after the presentation, so that way we can make sure that all your questions do get answered. So just as a quick reminder where we're at in the process, we spent last spring developing different options for bikeway designs on selected streets in the central area. We've now are to the stage where we've developed proposed designs. We've asked the community for feedback. Our next stage is going to be to complete the design, in which there'll be more community engagement and outreach at that time. And then again in spring of 21 and in 2022 is when construction can be expected for those projects. And while we have been focused a lot on the bikeway projects that are funded for design, as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, we do currently have a survey that we'll be sending out. So if we have your contact information, we will be sending this out through an email, and this will also be posted to the website as well, where we will be asking for feedback about where in the future can we extend additional bike facilities if we get funding for those. So that's something that you can look forward to as well. And if you don't know the website, again, it's bit.ly/Denver Moves Networks. That's where you'll be able to find that survey, and that will be posted by early next week. So just as a reminder of how you can continue to stay engaged there's a number of different ways, both through visiting both through the website that I just mentioned. That's the bit.ly/Denver Moves Networks. You can also email us with any questions or concerns at denvermoves@denvergov.org. And please help us to continue to spread the word about the projects and what's happening in the neighborhood. We will post regular updates to that website where you can stay informed on the project and on the project process. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for taking the time to join your DOTI team tonight to learn more about the Central Community Transportation Network program and projects. This concludes tonight's meeting, so please stay well and stay safe. Thank you.